I've got the candle lit this time. They're gonna need it. Hello everyone, I'm Father Aaron. Welcome to The Dungeon Minister! Alrighty, so, just to bring you up to speed, the heroes of Honeywood are accompanying Agnes, an 8th level cleric. She is way beyond them. But anyway, an 8th level cleric on a bit of a fact-finding mission. They are looking to find out what is the source of threat that the Magpie warned Agnes and her fellow clerics of. They're clerics of St. Mag, who has a sort of St. Francis-ish sort of feeling in my world. Anyhow, they are on their way to investigate. They have gone down through the forests to the mountains south of Akhagmar, and they have found a narrow canyon, at the end of which are caves. Well, they see one entrance from where they are, and they climb to reach it. Up the steep slopes, it is still climbable, and as they go, they find more and more tracks. Clearly, something humanoid, if not human, has been using this cave recently. In they go. The entrance is low and wide, and they come into a large space, domed and wide, with another entrance off to their right, letting in light from some place they couldn't see from down there, behind another ridge of rock or something. It is a sandy-floored cave with the evidence of fires scattered around, as well as bones. On the walls there are paintings that indicate an earlier occupation ages ago. Cave paintings, some of which have been marred in obscene and disgusting ways by more recent occupants. Orcs. Just a side note, orcs in my campaign are thoroughly evil. There's nothing redeeming about them, there's nothing redeemable about them. They're not, misunderstood, they're not maybe just a different culture, they're evil. They are wicked. They are disgusting, okay? They are the worst of the worst. Goblins are at least clever, and they have ideas, and they make interesting, if destructive and chaotic things. Kobolds are cowardly. We heard that. Yes, you heard it. You heard it. They just are, let's face it. Gnolls are brutes, okay? Hobgoblins are very sophisticated fighters. Bugbears are loutish, lazy. But orcs, they're just bad. They're just bad. So, orcs have been here. The elves can sort of tell by the signs, right? Elves have a particular hate for goblins and orcs. There's a relationship conflict there. Just like dwarves really hate goblins, that's really their main enemy. The elves have a particular disdain for the orc, and the orc for the elf. The tracks continue in. As I said, the floor here is a sort of sandy soil. The tracks continue very obviously to a passage that leads out the other end of the cave. Lighting a lantern, in they go up a narrow, winding passage with steps cut into it where it becomes very steep. These steps are also ancient. This was clearly used many generations, many eons even ago. This was used. These steps were not cut by the orcs. Up they climb. Eventually they come to a fork in the passage. To one side they can see a thin light entering the cave. There's a bit of a block at that entrance. There's a lip that goes down. It appears to have been made by someone throwing in rocks into a cave that naturally sloped down. Throwing in rocks to make actually a bit of a block. Why would they do that? They enter the room single file because it's a narrow passage. They enter and they see on the floor it's a corpse of something humanoid. Maybe an orc? They also see the floor move. This is a layer of giant snakes, giant racer snakes. And the reason that this blockade has been made is the orcs didn't want the snakes going anywhere else in the cave system. So they built up something that wouldn't completely prevent the snakes, but would make it less likely that they'd go this way. And the snakes don't really have any reason to go that way, so they don't. But some poor orc wandered in, maybe while doing the blockade work. Maybe he's the reason for the blockade work. But there he is. He has been chewed upon. Well, the party sees the snakes and they initiate combat. The problem being that this narrow passage has kept some of them outside. Agnes never gets into the room. Foefire is only like shooting over people, right? Touchberry is fully in. Bobjohnny is fully in. Even Fleetwood has to sort of sneak around them to even get involved in combat. And they fight. And I have to say, the dice do not favor the party in this one. They miss, they miss, they miss. Both elves use a magic missile, okay? And it is really the only one that Fleetwood has. Has other spells memorized. And one of the two that Bobjohnny has memorized. Well, anyway, they use a magic missile each because their melee is going so poorly. So they say, I'm fine. I know this will hit. And it doesn't even do that many points of damage, like 2 or 3, right? Because it's a dice roll for the damage. Anyway, they fight and fight. Finally, Foefire does manage to get through, and she engages with sword. She had been shooting with her bow. She starts to engage with sword. And, of course, Touchberry throws a flask of oil. And up it goes. It nearly takes Foefire's eyebrows off. Be careful, Touchberry. Eventually, they defeat the snakes, most of them. One slithers away out the entrance. There is a cave entrance at the end of this chamber. It's screened from the outside by vegetation, which is why the light coming in was so thin. They don't search the room, right? They don't search the room, which is unfortunate because the orc that was lying there has a +1 dagger, but oh well. On they go. The passage continues, narrow and winding with, again, steps cut here and there where it is very steep. And as they turn the corner, their lantern light falls upon a trio of giant mushrooms. Shriekers! Oh, jeez, the thing starts screeching and screaming and hollering. We have to shut them up. There are orcs here. We've got to shut them up. All right, Touchberry's gonna throw some oil. He winds back. He cocks his arm back and rolls another natural one. Another one. So, all right, what happens to the oil? There's a chance. He could throw it forward and it hits a friend. He could drop it. If it's a sword or something like that, it could break, but that's not the appropriate for this. So anyway, what's going to happen? Okay. As he cocks his arm back to throw, the flaming flask slips from his grip, and it hits Agnes, who was right behind him. So, Agnes is now on fire. What this does, it is, in addition to damage, it prevents her from focusing to cast a spell. She has Silence, 15-foot radius. That would come in very handy here. But she's on fire. She can't focus. She doesn't do it. All right, well, the others charge into combat. Shriekers are no danger. They're not going to hurt you, right? They just attract attention. So they're coming up and they're hacking away at these things. Bobjohnny throws one down in like 2 strokes, I think. It doesn't take long. It's only a couple of rounds of combat. One of the rounds of combat, though, Touchberry lights another flask. He lights it on Agnes. Anyway, and chucks it at the Shriekers. And this time, hits the Shrieker. But Foefire was right there. And so she takes some splash damage of fire and a few hit points off of Foefire as well as the Shrieker. Oh, Touchberry. Anyhow, they do kill the Shriekers, but not before they have made quite a bit of noise. I wonder who heard that. Well, there's nothing for it. Let's keep going. The combat had happened at a sort of fork, and they take the right-hand side. I think they're going to clear off one side of the dungeon at a time, I guess. And they go through this passage. There's another fork there, a passage leading to the left. They continue right, and they find a chamber. And as they enter and the lantern light spills across the floor, they can see bedding. Something has been sleeping here. Something intelligent, humanoid, has been sleeping in here. Okay. Who is staying in here? Who has been sleeping in this chamber? The orc guards. Now, I have to mention these minis. Dan, Catagolo, I'm sorry, Dan. If a name gets beyond 3 syllables, my brain shuts down. I can't even. Anyway, Dan C. sent these wonderful orc minis to us. They're so cool. So, this is who they run into in this chamber, right? It's just a handful of guards who watch this passage, and their plan is if the party had gone the other way, they were going to stalk them, follow them behind, and attack them in a particularly vulnerable spot, okay? But that didn't happen, and so they are around the sort of curve in the chamber, and they're around the corner where there's a table set up. They've been playing at dice, right? As the party creeps in, fully prepared for an ambush, of course, the orcs attack. Now, because the party was anticipating ambush, because they'd seen that something intelligent lived here, they were expecting it. There's no surprise roll, so it's just straight initiative. I don't even remember who won it. What I do remember was that the dice were still against the party. Now, Touchberry, Bob Johnny, they go into melee against a couple of the orcs who are swinging great cleaver-like swords, and they're doing pretty good, actually. Fofire targets the archer. There's an archer in the orc party, and that archer has jumped up on the table and is shooting from there. She targets that orc, and you know Fofire and hit rolls. Just, yeesh. Fleetwood engages one in melee as well. Agnes is back. I try not to bring NPCs in if I don't have to, right? And she will engage in battles. Don't worry, she'll get in on it. But with an 8th level cleric, I'm not really going to help him out that much, right? Yeah, she'll fight if she has to. But they've charged forward. They've each paired off against an orc, except for the one on the table, and Fofire shooting at that. Anyway, the lads quickly eliminate their melee opponents. I think Bob Johnny actually is taking on 2, and it takes him a little longer, obviously, but eventually Fleetwood has cleared off his opponent, and he goes for the archer on the table. This archer must be the nimblest little minx on earth, because he's jumping and hopping and does not get hit. Fleetwood tries again and again and again and again and again to attack this orc, and he's not, and the arrows are flying from Fofire, none of them hitting. Eventually one does, but it only does a couple points of damage, right? Bob Johnny finishes off his opponents. He comes in, swinging that great axe at this orc. Nothing. This orc must be dancing this way and that, just great, while still getting off shots and hitting. Finally, Touchberry has finished with his opponent, walks over to the table, and in one hit, boom! We decide that because of Touchberry's height, and the fact that the orc is up on a table, that he hits the orc yeah, so that's how he kills the orc. I will say that the orc had taken a couple of hits from Fofire by this point. So she had to hit a couple of times, but just never enough that if they got the hit, they rolled like a 17 or something for the attack roll, they always were rolling like a 1 or a 2 for damage. I think either Fleetwood or Bob Johnny did actually at some point make connection. I think Fleetwood did. It just wasn't enough. Anyhow, they finally beat the orcs. They do search these bodies, and they find, some coins. There was coins on the table as well. A lot of them had been kicked onto the floor. But coins, they were gambling at dice. They also find a key. Around the neck of one of the orcs, there was a key. Oh, okay. Take that. Let's check that fork that went to the left earlier. Let's go there. Well, they examine it. It goes a little ways in, and then comes to bars. A gate. And there's a lock there. The gate is closed, and there's a lock. Okay. Well, the orcs have locked this. Clearly, probably the key fits this. We're anticipating, but should we open this? I mean, maybe it's where they keep their treasure. Maybe it would be a great thing to open. Yeah, let's see. And Fleetwood casts light into the room. The ball of light appears in the center of a tangle of thick, glistening webs. And a huge, dark shape scuttles out of the light. Let's not go in there. No. This was the other thing. If the party had gone the other way and the orcs could get behind, they would have released their pet and sent it after them, right? But no. We'll just avoid that entirely. So they leave that room alone completely, and they head down back to where the Shriekers were, down the left fork from there. The passage twists and turns and eventually forks off, and they can hear the faint trickling of water coming from their left. Let's go there first. They enter a large chamber, and their lantern light spreads across the face of a flooded cave. Uh-oh. There's a crevice near the wall of the cave, close to where they came in, and water is burbling out of it to run in a wide sheet down the rock and into the water. There must be an outlet somewhere. Otherwise, the place would have flooded entirely, right? We're not going anywhere near that. Nope. Nope. Flooded caves, never a good idea. Nothing good comes out of that. We're not going to touch it. As it happens, it's empty, right? There's nothing in there. I could have put treasure in the bottom of it, maybe something good, but no, they didn't. They didn't want anything to do with it, so they just went the other way. Okay. They come now to a chamber, a smaller chamber, stuffed, loaded with gear. Here they find crates and barrels and a large pile of what at first just looks like random lumber, but as they approach it, they can see that it is clearly some disassembled something with 4 wheels. Is it a wagon? No, there's not enough structure here for a wagon. There's a big bowl. It's a catapult. There's a disassembled catapult line here. Now, I tell the elves, because the elves would know something about their enemy, right? They'd have some idea. I tell the elves, you know full well, orcs are not smart enough to use a catapult. I know, Lord of the Rings, orcs shoot catapults, don't talk to me. Okay, orcs, in my world, they're too stupid. Actually, it's in the book. It's right in the monster description. Orcs are too stupid to use complicated weapons like this, okay? So, what's this doing here? They must be working with someone else. They're probably working with Bargle. Bargle! They're not, actually. But who they are working with, well, never mind. All right, what are we going to do with all these weapons? Well, can we get them in our bag of holding? Well, there's like 75 swords in here, right? Gobs of them, short swords. Not the cleaver type that orcs seem to prefer. There's arrows, barrels and barrels of arrows, lots of arrows. And there are spearheads, just the heads of spears, but spearheads. There's also food. There is a barrel of onions, and Bob Johnny helps himself to half a dozen or so, sticking them in his pockets and pouches and whatnot. There's salted meat and fish and things like that as well. It doesn't look like orcish fare. They don't care for things that are too nice. Most of this food is still fresh. That's not orc food. Strange. I wonder who it's for. Anyway, they decide they're going to take... There are big dowels, pins that hold the catapult together. They take those. They can't steal the entire cat. It won't fit. They ask, can we put this in the bag of holding? No. Because, I mean, in terms of volume, they might even be able to get it in there. But no, the neck is too small. It's not going to open far enough for some of these pieces. So they just decide to take the pins so that it's at least inconvenient, if not useless. Anyway, they do take the swords, though. They ask what the sort of, encumbrance on a sword is, and we look it up. And as it turns out, the bag of holding, which they have emptied, right, because they emptied it out before going on, all those swords go in there. Every one of them. Okay. And it's not even anywhere near full at this point. So they take all this. And as they're working, and I have to say, they came in here super quiet because they know now that something's going on, that the shriekers have probably been heard, right? They've been super, super quiet. And so as they're working, every once in a while, say, you can hear a shout. It seems quite a ways away, but you can hear a shout. Something's down there. All right. Fleetwood says, all right, stay here with the lantern. I'm going to scout ahead, infravision time, right? I'll go slowly, let my eyes dark adapt, and I'm going to scout ahead. All right. It doesn't take much. He slips through the passage into another room similar size with openings at either end. The one to his left, light is streaming out of, and voices. Through there, clearly, another bunch of orcs, and they are arguing and yelling and laughing. They're having a grand old time. The fire must be to cook food. In fact, he can smell meat roasting because orcs, they don't need the light. They can see in the dark, but they do like to roast their food, and so he can smell that happening. All right, orcs. Come on, everyone. Shutter the lantern. And they go into the room, and they can see by the light that's coming in. It's not direct, but it's enough. They can see. All right, what are we going to do? Touchberry says, all right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to run in there, yell at them, and run out again. When they chase me, you attack. Perfect. So Touchberry gets all ready, and he charges into the room, makes fun of them, teases them, dances about a little bit. I say you run in. They are around a small fire over which indeed some unidentified meat is roasting. All around that fire are at least 10 orcs and one giant orc sitting in the corner. He turns around and bolts out, pursued by a horde of orcs. Now, Dan, I said, sent those absolutely awesome orc miniatures, right? But there were only a handful of them. But Lawrence at Dirty Basement Terrain also sent orcs. These were to be for Claricon. But I've got them in the meantime. And so a horde of orcs comes pouring out. A dozen orcs plus their chief. Now, they suffer the same thing that the party has been suffering, the constrained space. So they can't flood out in one go. They've got to come, pretty much single file out of that chamber into this next one. But as they do, they fan out. Now, the party have arranged themselves at the opposite end of the chamber, and Fleetwood and Bob Johnny, they wait for the last minute. They're going to launch lightning bolts. But not so fast, boys. They've got their dice. They're going to roll for damage. Not so fast. First, roll for initiative. Yeah, maybe you could say they're waiting in ambush and all that kind of stuff, but really when it comes down to it, we're going to roll for initiative because the party was shocked by how many orcs came out. I think the boys had seen the minis that I used, and they thought that, well, that's it. The ones from earlier, that's it. That's all the orcs he's got, right? And no. Anyway, so this horde of orcs comes pouring out. Roll for initiative. Luckily, the party gets initiative, and 2 lightning bolts flash through the orc ranks. Now, lightning bolt has a range. You can start it up to 120, 180 feet away from you, something like that. Well, they don't need to do that. They start it right at themselves, but it extends for 60 feet. It's a 60-foot long blast, and they look at where all the orcs are placed, and they can rulers, they're showing where it's going to land. And I'm saying, okay, well, it's hitting this wall. Where will that deflect to? And we're figuring out the angle. In the end, they take down 10 of the 12 orcs. Oofda. Which is a good thing, because after the combat with the snakes and the combat with the other orcs, the party is not in the best of shape. Bob Johnny is at 18 or 19, something like that. Touchberry in the low 20s. Everyone has been beaten up to some extent. Everyone has suffered some damage. Some of it at the hands of Touchberry and his Anyway, so they needed this. They needed, but there are still 2 left and the big guy. And they come charging in, right? They attack and hit Fleetwood, miss Bob Johnny, and then the big guy, right? Now, someone had suggested when I opened those, and it might have been Dan himself, suggested that the big guy should be an area of effect damage because he's got this flail, right? He's going to be swinging this thing. It's going to be an area of effect attack. He doesn't have to pick one. All right. He charges up, and who's in front? Well, of course, it's Fleetwood and Bob Johnny and Touchberry are up front. Who does he hit? All of them. All of them. Boom! Okay, this is a orc bodyguard. You'll see in the BECMI monster sections, any of the intelligent monsters, they will have a chief, and they'll list sort of just in the text, not as a separate stat block, but in the text they'll list, the chief fights as a 4-hit dice or a 3-hit dice monster, and he has bodyguards that fight as 2-hit dice monsters, something like that. So this is one of the bodyguards, and he's 2-hit dice, and I just maxed him out for hit points because I want these guys to be serious. I mean, look at the mini, for crying out loud. So he's got 16 hit points. In he comes, and he does a decent amount of damage with that thing. I decided that it's a flail, so it's like a mace or a warhammer, but the size of it is going to be a 1d6 plus 3, just the massive. We're talking the Witch King in Return of the King levels of maces here, right, of flails. So, huge amount of damage in one swing. I think he does like 7 or something, right? Boom! All right, well, they, of course, pour on to him. They just pour it on, and he lasts one more round. I think 2 of them get hits on him. Faux Fire actually also gets him with an arrow, but just the damage doesn't pile up. He has another round worth. This one he misses entirely, and they end him but fast. Now, the other 2 are still there. One of them decides to cut and run. The other one keeps fighting and is quickly cut down. The one who is running, though, get him! And Fleetwood chases him. Can I catch him? No, he's about as fast as you are. I mean, it's a similar dynamic here. So he's running after him into the chamber with the fire and the roast and all that. And then he throws a dagger, Fleetwood does, and just barely hits, and just barely brings him down. He'd been hit earlier in the other room, and it's just enough, and he dies. Now, there was a lot of noise here. The orcs howled and hooted and roared when they saw the halfling and charged out after him, and probably they bellowed a warning up the staircase that leads out of this chamber. Yes, they did. They can hear feet flapping and pattering coming down those steps. So the party assembles again and gets ready as 3 orcs burst in with hand weapons, and behind them an archer takes up a position on the stairs and begins pouring arrows into the room. Rinse and repeat what happened before. They're having a lot of trouble connecting with these guys. The dice aren't doing it for them. These orcs are hitting occasionally, not every time, but they're hitting a decent amount of the time, and Touchberry goes again with a flask of oil, and thankfully this is his last one. He throws oil and misses. Fortunately, he does not hit any of his friends. He just hits the wall, and now the wall is dripping with flaming oil. Okay, but the archer's still not hit. Well, the combat goes back and forth. At one point, Fleetwood tries to push his opponent into the flaming wall and does succeed. So now that guy is on fire a little bit. He takes 1 round because the oil isn't on him. He just rammed into it. So he just gets 1 round of fire damage, but it's enough because he'd already been hit a couple times. That guy dies. Bob Johnny is mowing guys down. Right, well, there's only 2 others. He mows one of his down. Touchberry has mostly focused on throwing oil, but he switches over to melee and is fighting. Agnes at this point does get into things and crashes one over the head and finishes him off. And the archer looks at the situation and says, nope, and runs up the stairs. Great. There's always one running away. So they charge up the stairs after this archer. They enter the chamber, in which there's a large table. And at that table, the orc chieftain, the archer cowering behind the orc chieftain. and a hobgoblin. Now, they've never seen a hobgoblin before. They've never entered into my campaign before. Their kingdom is a ways to the east, right? Almost directly east from the gap, across the grasslands, in a whole other area that I haven't mapped, and I don't even have an idea what it's going to look like. But of course, they have a sort of organized society. Hobgoblins are the apex goblinoid creature, right? They're the smartest, they're the most capable, competent, and this guy is tough. I think he's got 4 hit dice I gave him. He's pretty darn powerful, and he has a magic sword as well. He sees them come in, and into the charge. Actually, they were already prepared, right? Because the 3 who were in here, the 4, the archer and the other 3 who were in here, are the chieftain's bodyguards. So they already knew something was happening, and he had sent them down. Better deal with it at that end than up here. Well, they didn't deal with it. In come their, these elves and halfling and whatnot. The hobgoblin leaps to attack. The orc chief just behind him, and they bottle them up on those steps. And the idea is that those 2 will fight the invaders one at a time. Now, this does keep the archer from getting any shots in, which is good, but it's bad for Touchberry because it's Touchberry on the pointy end of that. And Touchberry gets hacked down to 8 hit points during this encounter. This is not good. This is not good at all. And right behind him is Bob Johnny. The 2 with the lowest hit points have come right to the front because, again, Touchberry got hacked up in the last couple of encounters. So there they are, and Bob Johnny goes down to 7 points, I think it is. He decides he's got to get out of this. He's got to back out. He actually retreats back and lets Fleetwood take his spot. And Fleetwood is, better hit points going on. He starts to fight and has some success. Bob Johnny was actually hitting. It just, he was getting hit back. They eventually wear these 2 down. Touchberry barely makes it out. Any one hit from the hobgoblin would have taken him out. But he just refuses to retreat. He just refuses. It's going to get him killed. It's going to get him killed someday. But he stays in the fight, and eventually both hobgoblin and orc chief fall in the same round. Of course, this clears the space for the archer to shoot. Who's the archer going to shoot at randomly? Okay, he's going to shoot at Fleetwood. He's shooting at Fleetwood. That's better than Bob Johnny or Touchberry. Bob Johnny's still kind of within the range. All right, what does he get? He doesn't hit. Doesn't hit at all. And Fleetwood charges across the room and, does him in. Oofda. That was not fun. That was not fun at all. They all come into the room now to assess things. They don't look at the sword. They don't look at the hobgoblin's sword. Magic sword. Anybody? No? We'll just leave it there then. Okay. I toyed with having Agnes pick it up to take back to Lord Morgan, but I've already given Lord Morgan a +2 sword, so it really wouldn't have helped. But it would have been logical that somebody would pick it up. But, I thought, no. The players don't think about it. I'm not going to think of it for them. Fine. They do search the room, though. On this table, there is a map, a very accurate and well-drawn map of the area, and Agnes immediately identifies it. That's Akagmar. These are the mountains that we are in. And right there is where we are. And the right there is marked with a little wooden figure of an orc. A little carved, it's like they're playing with minis, right? Anyway, there's a little, it's very crudely carved, it's just basically carved. But there it is, marking the position of the orc caves that they are in. Where Akagmar is, stands a little wooden human. Now, that's all fine, we know that. What is more troubling? On the east side of the mountains and to the south, there are a dozen little orc figures. And to the east, on the very edge of the map, there are 4 hobgoblins. An army is massing.